as an operator, a licence owner, I was a little bit concerned that the Department of Transport was deficient in proving the process which Uber used to recruit drivers and to circumvent some of the legalities that they would like to talk about. So what I did with my submission was remove the emotion and tried to give the committee a chronological view of what Uber does when it starts to look at and expand into areas, and how the facts and figures that they present to the public are false. So that's my business, and how Uber is affecting my business, both in terms of drivers, the uncertainty, and the actual decrease in my taxable income that I pass on through to the government.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll have a series of questions now for the next 20 minutes. In your submission, you state that that Uber was launched on the Gold Coast in August 2014.
Yes.
Can you provide a summary of what has happened to your business since then? I know you just talked about it a little bit, but can you give more detail?
So with a taxi driver, the taxi operation is 24/7, every day of the week. That means that there will be peaks and there will be troughs. The taxi industry and the drivers know that. They know that by driving Friday, Saturday night when they're operating in those peak times, that the clawback was that they will have to operate in the non-peak times to service the wheelchairs, the school runs and those off-peak demand times. What's happened on the Gold Coast, Uber has cherry-picked. They are out there, and in my submission I showed you that they guarantee to pay drivers $40 an hour, whether they do a job or not. So they're actually creating an artificial demand out there, and in which case a driver on the Gold Coast, if they logged into the Uber app for Friday, Saturday night, could possibly earn $800 and not do a single job. Now, when that comes to a taxi driver, if he sees people getting paid to do nothing, then obviously that's an opportunity for him because that's his area of expertise. The driver that drives on Friday, Saturday night, when that artificial demand has been created, what ultimately happens is those Uber drivers will congregate in the main areas, Broadbeach, Surface, Burleigh, Tweed, and they will clog up, even to the point where they're actually sitting at the back and front of taxi ranks now, parking spaces in hotels. That demand then, when the customer comes out, they will go to a cheaper option, which at the moment is Uber. So my drivers who have been waiting on a rank, waiting for an hour or two of a job, suddenly see someone else take that job. Obviously that's very disheartening for the drivers, because why should they have to service the public on Monday, Tuesday, when what they really were relying on was Friday, Saturday nights to get them through? So it means that we have a reduction in the number of drivers that are coming through our school. We've lost drivers to Uber because they're guaranteed money even though they don't do a job. Ultimately that means it affects the amount of time that a car can be on the road and also how much we actually earn. In figures, we are down 20 to 30%. We are not in our peak time yet, which is coming up now, Christmas, New Year, but on the Gold Coast there are over 1,400 Uber drivers. There are 357 taxis that can only be on the road. So when someone says that Uber is a small part of the playing field, they are actually 4 to 5 times bigger than Gold Coast cabs. So as it has dramatically affected our drivers, it has dramatically affected our income for our owners, and as my business as an operator, where I get a percentage of what the vehicle earns, 20 to 30% decrease.
When you talk about the number of vehicles that Uber run and the locations where they're picking up and the fact that they're paying the $40 per hour whether they carry customers or not, have you actually done any research? Do you have any data or any way that you can back up those statements?
I can back them up with confidential information, which I'm happy to supply, with the reduction in income and the drop-off in calls that are going through to our call centre. Yes. Okay. But obviously, as you understand, being a public transport provider, we already supply that data and some of it through to the government. Uber, under the right to information, can actually access that. So they would love to know where the major jobs are, what time of the day. This is a data company that can data mine our information and make sure they target their operation to affect us even more.
Well, let me assure you, if you give it to the committee in confidence, that'll be the end of it. It won't go any further than that.
That will be supplied.
Okay, thank you very much.
Shane, as a committee, we're here to look at this particular bill. This particular bill seeks to increase the demerit points associated with operating what is deemed to be an illegal taxi service. The government has put in place a review which is going to be handed down next year. We are in a position where we can look at amendments if need be, make suggestions to the government about how to make this bill better. Would you suggest that demerit points is the best way of dealing with this, or is there something you in particular would like to see done differently?
I think the option is, and I'm so glad that Uber did submit something, because on the first page of their submission in their cover sheet, it says legislators are responsible to the electorate for the development of thoughtful, effective and equitable laws. The current legislation is not effective. It's as simple as that. Uber are a $50 billion company. The reason we have laws and we have a compliance system is to act as a deterrent. We now have Uber almost $1.7 million in fine and expanding. So it is not an effective, equitable law. So the only way then is, as Uber have said, is your job is to develop thoughtful and effective and equitable laws. So I agree with Uber. It must be effective. And the only way that I consider, after 28 years in the taxi industry, is actually to go after those people that actually operate the vehicle. Because Uber was a faceless person. Even though someone will come here today and they'll fly back to Hong Kong, actually to go and talk to someone in Uber that actually does the service is the driver. It's the only person that must be held accountable for that service. Because all Uber says is, we're just the provider. We connect. We're the conduit between the driver and the rider. So in reality, we've either got to stop it one way, which is the rider, and they won't stop because it's a cheaper alternative, because there's no red legislation, there's no red tape, or whether that be compliance with insurance, which is fair and equitable. So you then therefore have to impact the supplier, which is the actual driver. So in my view, after I've considered this for 18 months, the only way is to actually give demerit points when an Uber driver is caught.
Okay, so it's been suggested to us that demerit points are mostly used for safety aspects. So if the law thinks that a driver is not acting safely, exceeding the speed limit by a dramatic amount, or something like that, that's when demerit points are used, but not in the instance of trying to fix a commercial outcome for something. What are your comments around that?
I would love my taxi drivers not to be issued demerit points for parking in a disabled parking spot or in a bus lane. So there's difference between a safety issue and a demerit type of system. So I understand that, but your job is to be an effective legislation. The current legislation you have is not effective. And if it means that you have to increase or change the legislation to bring in a harsher penalty to be effective, then it must be demerit points. There's no other option. What has worked overseas in Germany, where it has been shut down, Uber has been shut down, is they've increased the fine and made it a criminal activity. We're talking $1 million fine per instance. Now, Uber aren't going to pay that, or a criminal offence on the driver. So, as I put in my submission, when the Department of Transport said they were unable to give you a definite answer of where they are, what Uber will say is they operate in 200 countries and things like that. They might operate, but they're actually operating illegally. They are banned in most developed, regulated taxi environments. And by our standards, a fine of 1,700 is insignificant to the German fine of €1 million. Belgium, the Netherlands have been shut down, again, because they've threatened them with criminal convictions and massive fines. So if we want to go down that avenue and start issuing $1 million per occurrence, I probably will have the same effect. But our compliance then needs to be able to ensure that the driver is caught, prosecuted correctly through the courts, and then the fine is paid.
Okay, so you think the best form of fixing this is to go at the drivers as such. When we asked the department for clarity around whether Uber itself was illegal or not, they said they were unable to determine that. Do you think that the government should be doing some work on determining or making sure that they're either legal or illegal?
I don't think it needs to be determined. What I saw from the Department of Transport when they were here, it was 4 acting Department of Transport people. So they weren't actually in that position, they were acting. Now, as part of an operator, that concerns me, that our department is unaware of how Uber recruit, how they dispatch their system. So I go back to the first page of my submission is, a taxi service means a public passenger service other than an excluded public passenger service provided by a motor vehicle under which the vehicle, A, is able when hired to be hailed for hire by members of the public, or provides a demand responsive service under which members of the public are able to hire the vehicle through electronic communication, or C, or stands for hire on a road. Now, Uber have tried to convince successive governments around the world that legislation in the transport industry is archaic. It hasn't evolved. I want you just to have a look at that one that is through electronic communication. It doesn't say smartphone. It says electronic. I know the person that put that in there. Because what they thought of was, you might say smartphone, then Uber will say, well, hang on, you can do it on an app for your iPad. So it's not really a phone. You can actually do it on your Google Watch. So what was actually happening is the Queensland government, the reason why it's so regulated and has such a very good transport legislation is that word electronic communication. So in actual fact, several years ago, the people that were running the Department of Transport knew this was coming and could see that let's not just stop ourselves at mobile phones and things like that. Let's look at it as electronic communication. So no, I believe that our current legislation is adequate, and by looking at that and the submission I've given you, and I have another document that I'd like to be tabled because this has actually happened since my submission closed, and in there it will show you that Uber have actually set up Uber zones in Melbourne. We won't call them taxi ranks, we'll talk of Uber zones, which is exactly the same as a taxi rank. We'll just change the words. If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Yep. So in those 3 things, our current legislation is years ahead of other states and other countries. Yep.
Thanks, Shane. Are you guys happy to have those tabled? Get document table. Thank you.
And the reason why I've had to add that is in the last couple of weeks, Uber have expanded to the Sunshine Coast. They've announced on Facebook that they're looking for drivers in Cairns. They've talked about Gladstone, Rockhampton, Mackay and Toowoomba. On top of that, Uber will also say that they would like self-regulation. The second one down, driver recruitment, you can now join Uber online and never meet anyone in person. And you can do that in less than 5 minutes. So in less than 5 minutes I can leave here, submit my paperwork online, never meet anyone from Uber, and I can log into the driver app and be picking someone up around the corner. So those are the things that have changed in the last couple of weeks since the submission closed.
I imagine, Shane, your accountant would have a value placed on the licences that you control. I don't want to know what that is. Has that been impacted since...
We've had several...
maybe not just Uber, but ride sharing in general, and what do you see the future of that value?
A taxi licence on the Gold Coast, I'm not going to reveal the value, but what I will say is that major banks are now concerned. We have owners, and these are owners that have been in the industry. They've paid their taxes. We actually have the best public-private partnership of any industry. you give us the taxi licence for the public, which we privately invest in. The Queensland Government and Australian governments want superannuation funds to invest in infrastructure. I have owners that have it in their self-managed super fund. They've done it. They're years ahead. They're in family trusts, they're in company names, self-managed super funds. So those values, I would give you a figure of around about $120,000 that they've lost. That's the uncertainty and the fact that the banks now are coming in and revaluing, asking for market rates, and if there's not many sales that have gone through, they go on the last sale. So, yes, it is very impacting on that.
Shane, have you got a question?
Just in regards to the banks, what is the like a cost for you as a taxi operator for a taxi licence compared to Uber?
With Uber, I can use my own car. I can use the current registration I'm on, which would be $550 a year, and that is it. To run a taxi licence, if I go off the last government tender several years ago, it's about $500,000. I think the committee needs to understand that no one in the taxi industry has ever resisted advances. When the government brought in security cameras, we agreed to it. When the government brought in 24-hour GPS tracking, we agreed to it. We've now agreed to audio recording. You've mandated certain levels of insurance that we've got to have, CTP. So a taxi licence, for me to put on the road this year, the CTP and registration will be just under $7,000. To get full comprehensive insurance is $4,400. To protect my driver under a personal accident and injury, it's $550. So before I've made a single cent, I'm up for $12,000. I then have to have a vehicle that's less than 6 years old. Go out and buy a brand new Toyota Camry at $30,000. My driver gets half of what he earns. So to actually look at the costs, I have a $500,000 licence plus the stamp duty I've paid and a reoccurring $12,000 a year. And Uber, $550.
Just in regards to, and this is probably not the right wording that you use, but some of the misinformation that Uber is spreading or counteracting some of the issues that are being brought up here. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the first one I'd like to say is they have Uber zones, which is a taxi rank. You'll notice in their submission, which is their ride-sharing one today, which they'll wheel out, 9 times in there they'll tell you they don't do rank work. In actual fact, they do. Okay? On top of that, they look at it and say that there's a monopoly. Taxi industry is a monopoly. Gold Coast Cabs has 357 licences. They're actually owned by individuals. It's not a monopoly. The only monopoly in the room is actually Uber, because my drivers, there's 51 operators on licences on the Gold Coast. If a driver doesn't like the way I operate or the vehicle I've got, they can move to any one of those other 50. With Uber, there's one. Okay, so the image that we are a monopoly is totally false. The information that they provide about the taxi industry, again in their paperwork on page 12, they come up with a graph that says that taxis are late. We're so late, we actually don't arrive on time. In their own submission, in actual fact, 72% of taxis, if you book the taxi, arrives on time or earlier. In 2011, those taxis that were running late by 7.9 minutes. In 2013, the taxi industry had brought that down to 2.3 minutes. So if you booked a taxi, in actual fact, in 2013, if it was late, the average was 2.3 minutes, which in today's traffic, I think is a reasonable standard. The other perception that they do, that they say, is that 80% of the fare goes back into the community. That is currently what it is. Everyone in this room knows that Uber want to go to a fully autonomous, driverless car. So my question is then, if Uber get all the money and there's no driver, there's no more 80% going into the community. All of that money, all of that fare would be siphoned off to a tax minimisation place in the Netherlands. So understand that when we look at future legislation, are we going to allow a totally foreign-owned company to come in and provide public service for us, and all of that money, that revenue, go overseas? So the perception is there that the taxi industry, runs late, that we don't support our local community, that's there. The other thing that Uber do quite well is they actually team up with, or go into partnership and promotion with legitimate businesses. On the Gold Coast, they go to universities, nightclubs. In actual fact, when I've called those businesses, once the advertisements come out, there is no way that they would have entered that partnership if they'd known or Uber had told them that they were illegal in Queensland. So what they try and do is legitimise their business by partnering with actual legal businesses to create the perception that they are legal,
Shane, we'll pick the rest of the submission. I just got one more quick question, if you don't mind.
Shane Glenn Butcher from Gladstone here. Just want to, in your submission, you mentioned the ghost cars. Can you just explain to the committee what ghost cars are and how they work?
So what happened was when the Queensland government said that we are still going to make compliance an issue, what Uber did then, because remember it's a data system that works with Google. Google is an investor. They created ghost cars. So what this meant was that suddenly where a compliance officer could see you sitting in your Uber car in a car park, he could walk up to you, see the Uber app on the phone and say, mate, are you driving for Uber? There's an infringement notice. So what Uber did was they just changed that. If we can't see the cars and we create ghost cars that move around, then you'll never be able to know which one are the real cars and which ones aren't. The other thing that Uber can do is change the time delay on the vehicles. So where a compliance officer could see a vehicle and see it on the screen, oh, that one's moving away, it has to be that one, Uber would delay that by a couple of minutes so that you really wouldn't know which car now is leaving. So the ghost cars went on for several months until it became apparent that maybe the Queensland government might let Uber come in which case it was switched off. There was no more compliance, no more ghost cars. And it frustrated two people. One was a customer because they opened up the app and said, look, all these cars coming around, but they weren't actually there. And number two, the driver, the Uber driver, who I don't have much sort of sympathy for, in the fact that he was getting customers that were complaining, saying, I've seen all these cars, why did it take you 10 minutes to get here? So that's the backlash from the rider and the driver, as well as the fact that the government indicated that it might actually change the legislation, in which case it was turned on and off. I actually have video footage for that, and once again I'll submit it through. So you can actually see that these ghost cars come from the forest, and they come, 20 seconds later they start again, and they keep on coming down, and that's it.
Yeah, if you could make that available to us, that'd be
Absolutely.
very handy. And thank you, mate, because we've run out of time.